when the open access movement started taking off, the Varmus approach was a very moralistic one.
Mm-hmm.
And the stance that they adopted was, this is so obviously the right thing to do that anybody who doesn't move their publication open access as quickly as possible is acting immorally. This freaked out a lot of traditional publishers, particularly society publishers,
mm-hmm.
who kind of always thought they were the good guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was one piece. Spark then adopted a very strong adversarial
mm-hmm.
position
Right.
towards publishers. And a lot of librarians just bought into both of those.
Mm-hmm.
And partly I think this goes back to what I said earlier about librarians just not really knowing anything about publishing. And so you ended up with a situation in which librarians started just sort of repeating this
Mm-hmm.
mantra about how it's all produced for free, the publishers don't add any value, it should all be open access, and that should be easy, and oh, by the way, that's going to solve our financial problems.
Mm.
None of which is true, none of which has actually happened, but we ended up creating this rift between the library community and the publishing community, which has been particularly damaging in the case of society publishers, because the people involved in the societies and the editors and the senior authors are people on our campuses.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
This became very personal for me. It must be 6 or 7 years ago now. There was a battle of letters around the FERPA legislation,
Mm-hmm.
where Spark was getting provosts and deans to write letters in support of the FERPA legislation. And they were pretty successful at doing that, because going to a dean and saying, hey, we think there should be legislation to make all this stuff free, that's a pretty easy sell, as long as people don't spend a lot of time actually looking at the details.
As long as they don't know what's involved.
So there was an effort to, particularly coming out of the biomedical community, to kind of push back at that, largely with deans of medicine and research deans. And so there was a letter that was issued arguing that this was not an appropriate approach.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately in the blogosphere, there were really hostile comments about, just how terrible the people who were signing these letters must be,
mm-hmm.
and that they had no interest in education, and that they were deceitful, and all the kind of name calling that you get in the blogosphere. The senior signatory on that letter was my dean of medicine.
Mm.
And if ever there's a guy that I've known who has been more devoted and more dedicated to education and research, and he's been an editor and he's been an author, just a wonderful, upstanding guy, it's this guy. And to be in a situation where my tribe, the librarians,
mm-hmm.
was being so ignorant and hostile towards somebody who I thought they really ought to admire, it just kind of, that was it for me. And I think it was not long after that I did a talk here and declared myself an open access heretic. The notion being that Martin Luther never quit believing in Christ, he just quit believing in the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And I have never given up on the notion that open access, loosely defined as no subscription barriers, is a really, really worthwhile goal. But I don't believe in Spark, and I don't believe in the Spark approach. I think we have wasted a decade with this adversarial battle to try to legislate open access. Where we are now is the big commercial publishers are stronger than ever. Elsevier's dominance of the market has not changed. The legislative approach, the only victory that can be claimed through the legislative approach is the NIH public access policy, which has resulted in inferior copies of articles being posted on PubMed, many of which become free in their published versions anyway, because they're published by society publishers who make their stuff available after 6 or 12 months. And we haven't done anything to really figure out how to work with people who are experts in publishing to try to really change scholarly communication.